right, so let's be honest here. You wouldn't be listening right now if you didn't absolutely love a good thriller. The kind that just like keeps you up all night, heart pounding with every page you turn. Well, get ready. Because today we're going deep. We're doing a deep dive into the psychology of thrillers. Like, what's the deal with why we're so drawn to stories that, to be honest, kind of mess with our heads?
You know what I think is so interesting about this is that it's so much more than just entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this excerpt here, and it's really packed with research on this. And it's got some pretty fascinating insights, really, into why we crave these stories that, they get our hearts racing.
It really is like this paradox because, fear is supposed to make us avoid danger, not run towards it. It's like the most basic survival instinct, right?
Right, exactly. But thrillers actually kind of tap into that exact same system, but in this controlled way, Think about that feeling when you're watching a movie and like the killer's about to strike and your heart just leaps into your throat, even though you're safe and sound, on your couch at home. That's your body. That's your fight or flight response kicking in. And thrillers are really clever because what they do is they sort of hack into that primal wiring. They give you a taste of those super intense survival instincts, but without any actual real threat.
Okay, so that explains the like adrenaline rush. But what about actually like enjoying the fear itself? You know what I mean? Like, why do we actually like being scared when we're reading or watching a thriller?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. I want you to think about it this way. Thrillers actually give us a safe space to confront the anxieties that we have in real life. Let's be real, right? It's much less scary to watch Hannibal Lecter on screen than it is to run into a real-life cannibal.
That is a terrifyingly good point. And, the excerpt even uses the example of a stalker. And I think that's like a pretty common fear for a lot of people. But in a thriller, we get to experience that fear, the suspense, the vulnerability, but without any actual danger.
Precisely. And it's that safe exposure, right, that allows us to explore those fears, process them, and maybe even get a sense of like mastery over them. It's almost like a mental dress rehearsal for situations we hope we never actually encounter in real life.
So it's not just about the thrill, it's also about confronting those deeper anxieties we have, and maybe even like finding this weird sense of satisfaction in doing so.
Absolutely. I think there's a real cathartic element to it. We get to experience that anxiety, we see it resolve within the story itself, and then we kind of emerge on the other side feeling like, hey, I survived that, even if it was just in my imagination.
Yeah, it's like facing those fears head on and coming out on top, but with popcorn and comfy pajamas instead of like actual danger. I'm into that.
Oh, yeah. And don't forget the puzzle-solving aspect of thrillers. They really tap into that natural human curiosity that we all have. We're wired to crave answers. We want to make sense of the world around us. And thrillers really give us that opportunity in a way that's really engaging.
Oh, yeah. The source even talks about how we almost become detectives in our own right. We're trying to solve the crime before it happens, or predict that plot twist, or like untangle all those really complex character motivations. It's like our brains are just like hardwired for that kind of mental challenge.
Right. And the more complex the thriller is, the more rewarding it feels when you finally crack the code. So we get to flex those problem-solving muscles, and that sense of accomplishment is so satisfying. It's like that aha moment when you solve like a really tricky puzzle, but, obviously with much higher stakes.
It's like a mental workout, but with like a side of adrenaline and suspense. Much more exciting than my usual Sudoku routine. But okay, what about that darker side of like enjoying the fear itself?
This source talks about this concept called benign masochism. And that sounds kind of wild.
It is wild, and it really gets right to the heart of why we find these thrillers so compelling. It basically suggests that we actually get a kick out of experiencing negative emotions, as long as we know that we're safe, Think about that like really chilling scene in Silence of the Lambs, where Hannibal Lecter is dissecting a human brain.
Okay, I'm already getting chills just thinking about it.
Right. It's disturbing, maybe even a little repulsive, but yet we're just glued to the screen. Why? Because we get to experience the taboo, the transgression, but with this safety net of fiction. It's like a controlled dose of the forbidden, And that's strangely exhilarating.
It's almost like we're getting away with something, like we're experiencing these dark emotions, but without any real-world consequences. Exactly. And that's a powerful feeling. Thrillers kind of give us permission to indulge in those, dark, intense emotions, because we know deep down that it's all in good fun.
Okay, I'm starting to understand why I have a whole shelf dedicated to thrillers now that you mention it. This benign masochism thing is really starting to make sense, but how does that actually, play out in different types of thrillers?
That's a great question. And that leads us to some really interesting distinctions within the genre itself. There are so many different flavors of thrillers out there, and each one kind of offers a unique experience, tailored experience, you could even say, for the reader or the viewer.
So you're saying there's a thriller out there for everyone?
I think so, yeah. And I think that's part of what makes the genre so enduring. It's constantly evolving, constantly finding new ways to tap into our fears and anxieties.
This is fascinating stuff. I'm really starting to see thrillers in a whole new light, and I can't wait to hear more about these different flavors of thrillers that you're talking about.
Well, let's dive into that, because there's a whole world of suspense and psychological intrigue waiting for us.
Let's do it. This deep dive is getting really good.
Yeah. Buckle up, because we're about to go even deeper. We're going to explore the different ways that thrillers play on our fears and how they use those fears to keep us hooked.
I'm ready. Let's go. So we're really diving deep into this whole benign masochism thing. It's like we're drawn to these dark and thrilling experiences, but only because we know we're safe, right?
Yeah.
So is it all about finding that perfect balance between the thrill and that safety net?
Yeah, you totally hit the nail on the head there. Thrillers are masters at walking that tightrope. They give us the adrenaline rush, the fear, all the suspense, but there's always that underlying reassurance that it's all fictional, there's no real danger.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that is really key for us to fully embrace the whole experience.
It's like that feeling you get when you're riding a roller coaster. You get that crazy stomach-dropping thrill, but you also know that you're strapped in and there are all those safety measures in place.
That's a perfect analogy. And just like with roller coasters, everyone has their own threshold for how much thrill they can handle. Some people love those super intense edge-of-your-seat thrillers,
Yeah.
while others prefer something a little more subtle, a little more psychological,
Yeah, that makes total sense. It explains why there are so many different flavors of thrillers out there. You've got your serial killer thrillers, your psychological suspense novels, your conspiracy theories. There's a thriller for every taste.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And each subgenre plays on different fears and anxieties, right? It offers a tailored experience for whoever's reading or watching. For example, a stalker thriller might tap into those anxieties we have about personal safety and boundaries, while, let's say, a conspiracy thriller might feed into our mistrust of authority or a fear of the unknown. It's really fascinating how these stories reflect our individual and even our collective anxieties.
So does our love of a good scare actually say something about us as people?
Yeah.
Are thriller fans just wired differently?
Well, that's a question that psychologists are still trying to figure out, honestly. But some studies have suggested that people who enjoy thrillers tend to be more open to new experiences, more curious, maybe even a little more adventurous in real life. They're often the ones who are drawn to exploring those darker, more complex aspects of human nature,
Wow, that's really interesting. So it's not just about escaping from reality then. It's also about trying to understand ourselves and the world around us a little better, even if it's through the lens of a fictional story.
Exactly. Thrillers can be this kind of safe space for us to experiment with different emotions, to test our boundaries, and even confront those aspects of ourselves that we maybe don't fully understand or acknowledge in everyday life. It's a way to explore, the full spectrum of human experience, the good and the bad.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own psyches, but with a way more exciting narrative and a much lower risk of actual harm. This deep dive is seriously making me rethink my whole relationship with thrillers.
I love to hear that. It's all about, gaining a deeper appreciation for the things you're passionate about. But there's one more layer to this that I think you'll find really interesting. This idea that thrillers don't just reflect our anxieties, but also our desire for resolution and control.
Okay, I'm all ears. What do you mean by resolution and control?
Well, think about it this way. In real life, a lot of our anxieties and fears come from this sense of uncertainty, this feeling that things are outside of our control. But in a thriller, we're given a structured narrative, a puzzle to solve, and ultimately a resolution. Even if the ending is ambiguous or unsettling, there's still a sense of closure that we often don't get in the real world.
That's a really interesting point. It's we crave this sense of order, and understanding, especially when we're faced with things that scare us.
Yeah, and thrillers deliver that in spades. They let us experience chaos and fear in a contained environment, knowing that ultimately there's going to be some kind of resolution. And a lot of times that resolution involves the triumph of good over evil, of order over chaos. It's a really satisfying narrative arc that speaks to that fundamental human desire for control and meaning.
So it's not just about the thrill of the chase, it's also about the satisfaction of seeing justice prevail, of knowing that even in the darkest of stories, there's a possibility for things to be set right.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message, especially in a world that can often feel so unpredictable and unsettling.
I never thought about it that way before, but it makes so much sense. We're not just passively consuming these stories, we're actively engaging with them, seeking meaning, resolution, and maybe even a little bit of reassurance that even in the face of fear and chaos, there's still hope for a positive outcome.
You got it. And that brings us back to the core of why we love these stories. They're not just entertainment. They're a reflection of our deepest fears, our desires, and how we make sense of the world around us.
This has been an incredible journey so far. I can't wait to hear what else you've uncovered in this research. What are some of the other key insights that have stood out to you? I think a lot of people would just write off thrillers. They'd say they're just popcorn entertainment. But this whole deep dive has shown me that there's so much more going on. It's like we're unlocking all these hidden rooms in our own minds.
I completely agree. It's not just about getting that adrenaline rush. It's about exploring these primal emotions. Fear, curiosity, that drive we have to solve a mystery, all in a safe and engaging way. And, one of the most compelling points that this research highlights is that thrillers tap into our fascination with that darker side of human nature.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. Like, we're completely terrified by characters like Hannibal Lecter or Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, but at the same time, we can't get enough of them. So why are we so drawn to these characters that do such terrible things?
It's really a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Like in real life, we would definitely avoid those kinds of people. But in fiction, we can safely examine them, try to understand their motivations, and maybe even find a weird kind of pleasure in their transgressions. It's like peering into the abyss, but without actually falling in.
So it's like a way for us to explore the taboo, the forbidden, the stuff that really repulses us, but also intrigues us at the same time, but all within this safe space of a story.
Exactly. And by engaging with those darker parts of humanity in this fictional setting, we actually gain a better understanding of the real world. We learn about just how complex human behavior really is, the different motivations behind good and evil, and how fragile that line really is that separates the two.
It's like thrillers are giving us this crash course in human psychology, but with a much more gripping narrative than your average textbook. And they also seem to offer this sense of control, you know what I mean? Especially in a world that can feel so chaotic and unpredictable.
That's a great observation. If you think about it, even when the world in the thriller is falling apart, there's usually a detective, a hero, or even a group of survivors who are fighting to restore order. They want to solve the mystery, bring the villain to justice. And a lot of the time, they actually succeed. It's this narrative arc of chaos and then resolution, this idea of good ultimately triumphing over evil. And that really speaks to that deep-seated human need for order and meaning.
So it's not just about escaping into this world of suspense and thrills. It's also about finding that reassurance that even in the darkest of times, there's still a possibility for things to be set right. That's a really powerful message, especially in today's world.
It really is. And that's what elevates thrillers above just simple entertainment. They tap into our deepest fears, our hopes, our anxieties about the world. And they offer us this glimpse of resolution, of justice prevailing. And that's so cathartic and satisfying, even if it's just within a book or on a screen.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a completely new perspective on why I, and I think so many others, are drawn to these stories. It's not just about the chills and thrills. It's about understanding ourselves and the world around us just a little bit better.
Exactly. And as we wrap things up here, we'll leave you with this thought. The next time you find yourself totally engrossed in a thriller, take a second to think about what anxieties it might be reflecting in your own life. What kind of mysteries do you find yourself most drawn to solving? What characters do you really resonate with, and why? The answers might really surprise you. And they could even reveal something super interesting about your own psychology.
That is such a good point. It's like we all become these amateur psychologists when we get into a good thriller. We're analyzing the characters, their motivations, and ultimately ourselves. That's kind of amazing.
It really is. So the next time somebody tries to tell you that thrillers are just mindless entertainment, you tell them there's a whole lot more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, I will definitely be doing that. This has been such an incredible journey into the psychology of thrillers. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have.
The pleasure was all mine. And remember, the next time you feel that little shiver of suspense, take a moment to really appreciate that complex interplay of psychology and storytelling that's happening. That's what makes thrillers such a captivating and rewarding genre.